Welcome to biology. In this video, we are continuing our biochemistry unit, and we are looking specifically at the wild world of water. First, a few fun facts about water, and you probably already know some of these, but 3/4 of the world's surface is actually covered in water, and all living things need water in order to survive. Scientists also think that if we can find water on another planet, then the life as we know it might be able to live there too. Granted, there might be life there in a totally different form that follows totally different rules of chemistry, but we just don't understand them, so we can't identify it, and that's a topic for a whole nother day. But water is really the foundation for a lot of living things. Some of the properties of water that are extremely important build off of this idea of polarity. Now, polarity is what happens when there is an uneven distribution of electrons between the atoms within a molecule. Water is 2 hydrogen with 1 oxygen bonded together to make a little Mickey Mouse ears type molecule. But what happens here is water is formed through covalent bonding, which is the sharing of electrons. The oxygen would prefer to have 8 valence electrons, the hydrogen would prefer to have 2 valence electrons, so what happens is they get really close together with 2 hydrogen close to 1 oxygen, and they all share electrons. But in this process of sharing, the oxygen tends to be a little bit grabby and hold the electrons a little bit closer than the hydrogen can, and that results in a polar covalent bond. So the shared electrons tend to spend a little bit more time around the oxygen atom than they do around the hydrogen atoms. So because electrons are negative and protons are positive, you have 10 electrons swirling around 8 protons near the oxygen end. And you don't really have any electrons swirling around the 1 proton on each of the hydrogens. So that means that the oxygen side is just slightly negative and the hydrogen side is tiny little bit positive. This is not making it an ionic bond. This is just making that covalent bond slightly unequal sharing. That's it. So one side of the water molecule is a little bit negative, the other side is a little bit positive. And this leads to some pretty interesting interactions between other water molecules. So each water molecule attracts other water molecules like magnets. This is hydrogen bonding that's happening between separate water molecules. So in this picture in the middle, the red circle is the oxygen, the white circles are the hydrogen. So the white circle side of the molecule is slightly attracted to the red circle side of a different molecule. So the water molecules have these hydrogen bonds between each other. And the tendency of water to stick to other water, so 2 similar substances to stick together, that's called cohesion. Think of it this way. Co-captains have to stick together to help the team be successful. So cohesion means 2 water molecules, so similar, have to stick together in order to hold that big blob of water in one place. Surface tension is what results because of this strong cohesion. So surface tension is this ability of water to stick to other water molecules so well that it doesn't really let other things get in. So this is why you're able to float a paperclip if you set it on top of water ever so slightly. This is also what allows things like water striders, which is this little insect, to walk across the surface of water. So water gets the high surface tension because of polarity, and that polarity causes that cohesion, which creates surface tension. There are several other properties of water. This next one is called adhesion. That's the tendency of two different substances to stick together. So think of water sticking to something that is not water. So you're adding water to something else. So if you've ever been in a car when it's raining, you notice that the water sticks to the glass and you need to use the wiper blades to wipe it off so you can see. That is adhesion. That water is sticking to the windshield. Capillary action is the result of adhesion working in nature. So capillary action happens when you have a very narrow tube. And if one end has water in it, that water is actually going to pull itself up the tube, which is crazy. This is how water is able to climb up from the roots of the plants all the way up to the leaves near the top of the tree. This is why plants don't get watered on their leaves. That doesn't do anything. You need to have the water going directly to the roots. So water is the only compound that is able to exist in all three phases on Earth. And there would be no life on Earth without water. Water also has this goofy little property called solid expansion. Typically, when a substance becomes a solid, it becomes more dense. Water is not the case. Water actually expands, and that allows ice to float. Now, this is critical for life on Earth, because if ice didn't float, as a lake would freeze, you would have the top surface freeze over, and that ice would then shrink and sink down to the bottom. Now you would have a new layer of ice form across the surface, then it would shrink a little bit and sink down to the bottom. And eventually you would stack that whole lake solid with ice. And that means nothing could really live in there. By having ice float on water, it creates this kind of insulation across the lake. That allows living things to survive underwater in the winter. Also, there's many organisms that have developed the ability to chisel through the ice to access that water that's underneath. And again, that allows life to exist. So in summary, this was a lot of information. Water is formed by polar covalent bonds. And those polar covalent bonds are what holds the two hydrogen to the one oxygen. But then we have hydrogen bonding happening between two or more water molecules. And that leads to some really interesting properties. So we have adhesion and cohesion. Adhesion is the ability of water to stick to something else, and cohesion is the ability of water to stick to itself. These two properties work together to produce capillary action, which allows water to be pulled up from the roots to the top of a tree. So that water is sticking to the insides of the tube, which is being able to pull itself up, but it's also creating this chain of water molecules due to cohesion. So the water chain is being pulled up through adhesion to the top of the plant. Surface tension allows things like small insects to be able to scurry across the top of water, and that is a fascinating property of water that allows some things to kind of float on top of water. And then solid expansion, that's this idea that when water freezes to form ice, ice actually expands and is less dense than liquid water. Again, I know this was a lot of information. I do know I went quickly. Feel free to rewatch the video, send me your questions, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. I hope you learned something as you watch this video.